Today's lesson will be on the causes and events leading to the American Revolution. We just finished up the French and Indian War, and yet here we are diving into another war. This war will be between 1763 to 1774. What was the American Revolution? Well, it's going to be yet again another war that's going to happen. This time, England and the 13 colonies will not be on the same side. We have a little dialogue going on. The 13 English colonies are saying, "We are tired of Mother England taking advantage of us. We want our independence." And then we see the introduction of King George III, who will be the king during the American Revolution for England. And he's saying, "You're insane if you think we're going to let you have independence. You belong to me." So this American Revolution will be a war between the 13 English colonies and Great Britain. The 13 colonies want independence. They no longer want to be part of England or Great Britain. They want basically a breakup. And so this breakup will happen between Lady 13 Colonies and Mr. King George III, who is the King of England during this time. We're going to consider him that toxic boyfriend, el novio tóxico. Okay, so King George is probably asking, but wait, why? Why do we have to break up? And one of the first signs of a toxic relationship is going to be taking advantage of. And had the 13 colonies been taken advantage of? Yes, we had seen this already with mercantilism, in which they had to sell all of the items cheap to England. The mother country would turn it into manufactured goods and then sell it back to them at a far more expensive price. And then on top of that, England passes a Navigation Act saying, hey, you could only trade with me. And so, yes, Mother England was definitely taking advantage of the 13 colonies. Sign number 2 that you are in a toxic relationship, they make you pay for everything. And did this happen between England and the 13 colonies? Yes, with the French and Indian War. Remember, Great Britain won the war, but there was a huge debt left over that we borrowed from William Pitt, sugar daddy number 1. And so King George III and Parliament create taxes in which the colonists are going to have to pay for that debt from the French and Indian War. Sign number 3 that you're in a toxic relationship, they try to control you. Did this happen between England and the 13 colonies? Yes, with the proclamation of 1763. The colonists were not allowed to settle west of the Appalachian Mountains. Remember, they were trying to prevent another war. Wars are very costly. What did the colonists do? They still crossed it anyway. They disobeyed the king and crossed that proclamation line of 1763. So what are going to be the causes of the American Revolution on top of everything that we just mentioned about having a toxic relationship with England? We're also going to see something called no taxation without representation. Basically, the colonists are saying that they shouldn't be taxed without having a say of how much or who or what should be taxed. So they didn't really get to vote. There wasn't anyone from the colonies over there in England in Parliament making decisions on how much taxes they should pay. Parliament there is just pass the taxes without asking the colonies. It doesn't really matter. They still have to pay for it. They have to pay for the debt from the French and Indian War through these taxes. A couple of vocabulary words that you do need to know for this lesson. Boycott. Boycott basically means refuse to buy. You are not buying items. This is what's going to happen as the mother country starts passing taxes on the colonies. They're just say, fine, we won't pay the tax on that. We won't even buy the item in general. So they're going to boycott those items. No taxation without representation. I just showed you that in the previous slide. Colonies did not like being taxed because they had no representation in English Parliament. They really didn't have a say. A loyalist. A loyalist is going to be someone living in the 13 colonies, but they're still loyal to England. They're loyal to King George III, that toxic King George III. Repealed means canceled. And then the last one is patriot. If you are a patriot, you are someone that supports independence. You don't want to be part of England anymore. You're living in the 13 colonies, but you don't want to be part of England. You want to gain your independence. Now let's talk about some of these taxes that are going to get passed. Basically, England's going to put a tax on everything that comes into the 13 colonies. The first one will be the Sugar Act, and it's basically in the name. This act placed a tax on sugar and molasses. Molasses is what they use for the syrup, so if you like pancakes in the morning, you would have definitely purchased some molasses. What are the colonists going to do? They're actually going to end up smuggling at any point or any chance that they can get to smuggle in these items without having to pay for that tax. And then eventually they're just not going to buy it. Fine, you want to tax it? We're not going to buy it. They're going to boycott it. What else are they going to tax? Well, England is going to see, what do these people use a lot of? Written materials. So the Stamp Act of 1765 required revenue stamps. It required a royal stamp on it for any newspaper, playing cards, books, anything was written had to have the stamp. And of course, the stamp is going to cost money, so that's going to be the tax form. What did the colonies do? They're going to boycott. They're going to stop buying these items so that England doesn't make any money off of them anymore. On top of that, a group of people are going to come together and form what we call the Sons of Liberty. And this group, which was run by Samuel Adams, the Sons of Liberty, they're actually going to do this tar and feather tactic. And let me show you what that looks like. This is a picture of a tar and feather tactic. So what would they do? Anyone that was selling these royal stamps, I mean, obviously you're on the king's side, they would drag you out of your business. They would take off all your clothes. They would put tar on you. If you don't know what tar is, it's kind of like that black, like chapapote. If you've ever heard of chapapote, it's kind of like that black tar that they use. It's very sticky. They would cover you in that, and then they would throw feathers on you. What did that represent? That represent that you were a chicken, that you couldn't stand up to the king if you were there selling his royal stamps. That is what we call the tar and feather tactic. So here we have a little political cartoon of the Stamp Act of 1765. One of the guys is saying, look, another new tax from Parliament. And then the other one says, and this one taxes everything on paper, books, deeds, and newspaper. Why, it even taxes our playing cards and dice. So they're definitely outraged over these taxes. Here's a little visual on what that royal stamp looked like. And then they would definitely post, do not even ponder, don't even think of selling or trading goods without the royal stamp. If you choose to disobey the law, a severe penalty will be paid. So this is England threatening the colonists. You better be paying for that royal stamp. This is the group that I just mentioned, the Sons of Liberty, which was organized by Samuel Adams. So those two S's match up. That's an easy way to remember it. Sons of Liberty, Samuel Adams. It was started in 1765. This is going to be a group of patriots, people that wanted independence. They organized boycotts, not to buy the English goods, and protests in the colonies. And they were also responsible for that tar and feather tactic that we just talked about. So after that Stamp Act is passed, the colonists are going to come together and have a meeting called the Stamp Act Congress in 1765. They meet in New York to organize a boycott. Again, they're not going to buy any of these goods. Colonial efforts were actually successful. England ends up taking off that tax. They repealed the tax. They canceled it on the Stamp Act because they weren't making any money. People just stopped buying all of these goods because it had to have that royal stamp on it. So their boycott actually worked. The next act that will be passed in Parliament is going to be the Quartering Act of 1765. Colonists were required to quarter, house, and feed British soldiers in their homes. Can you imagine having someone knock on your door? Hey, can I come in? Can I sleep on your bed? Can I eat your food? Can I borrow your clothes? That's what would happen under the Quartering Act. The colonists are obviously going to be very angry, and they said that it was unfair. Today, because of the Third Amendment, we do not quarter soldiers in our home. So the king and parliament come back in 1767 and say, fine, you didn't want to pay that Stamp Act? Well, now you're going to have to pay the Townshend Acts. And the T in Townshend is going to stand for tax on everything, because Parliament will pass this act and it will place a tax on lead, what you use for pencils, paint, paper, tea, glass, anything that you could think of, they put a tax on it. And on top of that, they're getting smarter. The people in England, they start sending over soldiers and knocking on people's doors. Can I come in and check your house? And if you have any of these items that are on the Townshend Act, I want to see where the proof is that you paid that tax on it. So this brings up what is called a writ of assistance, warrants that allowed soldiers to search colonists' homes. And obviously, the colonies are going to be upset. They're going to boycott these items so that England doesn't make any money off of them. So the colonists say, hey, if our boycott worked for the Stamp Act, let's do the same thing for the Townshend Acts. So they end up boycotting all of the items that were in the Townshend Acts, and it ends up working. England repealed the acts except for one tax. England does not take off the tax on tea. And in this same time frame, in 1768, England is going to send 5,000 British troops to Boston, Massachusetts, and this is going to have a disastrous effect. Now, these 5,000 troops that were sent over to Boston will be the cause of the Boston Massacre in 1770. When I think of massacre, I think of like a lot of people dying, but in the Boston Massacre, it was not as many. March 5th, 1770, 5 colonists are going to be killed by British soldiers. So they're basically coming together here in Boston. And the colonists obviously don't like the British soldiers. So they're always name calling them. And on this day, they were actually throwing snowballs at these soldiers. The soldiers, I guess, were having a bad day. The British soldiers were having a bad day. And they whoop out their guns and they start shooting. And 5 of the colonists are going to be killed. One of the first ones to get killed is in that visual you see on the bottom. His name was Crispus Attucks. He will be the first casualty, the first person to die at the Boston Massacre. And then obviously the colonies and the colonists are going to be upset. And this is actually going to gain a lot more support for people to join the patriotic side, for people to want to gain independence against England. I mean, look at them. They're already shooting out guns when all they were doing is throwing snowballs at them. So after the Boston Massacre, Samuel Adams is going to organize yet another group called the Committees of Correspondence. And an easy way to remember the Committees of Correspondence is with those 2 C's. They basically stand for communication, because it's really going to be a series of pamphlets and newsletters or type of newspaper articles that come out to keep the colonists informed on what the British were doing, and really as a way to convince more loyalists to turn into patriots, to not be loyal to the king, but instead want their independence from the king. So the Tea Act will get passed in 1773. And remember, guys, the tax on tea was never taken off. It was never repealed. Even though the Townshend Acts had been canceled, they still kept that tax on tea. And now with the Tea Act, it's going to require the colonists to buy tea only from one company. And guess where that company is from? Yes, Great Britain. So the British East India Company is going to be the only tea that will be allowed to be imported into the colonies. And the colonies are obviously not going to be happy about this, and they are going to display their anger against this with a little party. So after that Tea Act is passed, the colonists have finally had it, and they're really going to display their anger with the Boston Tea Party. Samuel Adams is back again with the Sons of Liberty, and they end up dressing up as Native Americans. They go into Boston Harbor. They find a ship that is packed with chests of tea from the East India Tea Company, and they end up dumping all of those chests into the harbor, really to show Great Britain and the king that they were fed up with the taxes. And this is really considered an act of civil disobedience. Civil meaning people, and disobedience obviously going against the rules of those who are in charge. They were being disobedient. The Boston Tea Party is really considered a very iconic event in the founding of American history. And as a fun fact, did you know that a chest of tea that was dumped during the Boston Tea Party ended up here in Laredo for some time? I did put the link there for you so that you could be able to click on that story if you are interested on seeing how that chest of tea ended up in Laredo. So when Great Britain and King George III get word back that the colonists have had their Boston Tea Party, they are going to be very upset. A note comes in for King George saying, "Sir, the colonists have dumped a shipment of tea into Boston Harbor." And King George answers with, "Malditos! They're going to pay for this. Pass the coercive acts." And so the word coercive actually means harsh, intolerable, that you can't tolerate them. So Parliament and King George end up passing these acts after the Boston Tea Party as a punishment to the colonists. It really closed the Boston port. He said, no more self-government. You are going to be under military rule, which means the army will be in charge, and English officers will be tried in England. So if any of the English officers did something wrong, such as the Boston Massacre, they weren't going to face any punishment within the colonies. Instead, they would go back to England and probably get just a simple slap on the hand. The colonists are going to have to come together and hold a meeting to see what is going to be the next step. So once those coercive or intolerable acts are passed by England, the colonists know that it's getting serious. And so they have to call a meeting, which is going to be called the First Continental Congress in 1774. What was it? It was a meeting in Philadelphia to basically discuss what they're going to do now. Things are getting pretty serious. So they decide to start forming a militia, forming an army, continue to boycott all of those goods that are being taxed, and to, of course, help Boston because Boston was under military rule. And here we have a gentleman saying, King George III isn't very happy about our little party. Pero me vale. Let's form a militia and continue to boycott. Gentlemen, we just might have to go to war. And a war will indeed happen. This is where we're going to see the start of the American Revolution that will last between 1765 and 1783, in which the colonists are going to want to gain their independence from Great Britain.